Alright, so hello everyone. This is episode 9 of the More Knowledge Show, coming to you live from a garage in Alabama in the United States of America. Well, it's been a while since we have a video, but I'm finally getting back to it. Well, to put it simply, basically my smartphone stopped working, so I was unable to put the videos together and release them. But anyway, we're back. So the first thing I want to talk about is the British economy is already falling apart, and the Brexit actually hasn't even happened yet. It's probably gonna happen in October, but already in the second quarter, their economy contracted 0.8%, and a lot of this is because of uh, uh, weak investment, and that same thing is actually going on in America. But what we're seeing is in a lot of these other countries, a lot of these countries are kind of in the same trends. They're seeing the similar stuff, but it's getting worse in these European countries before it's getting worse here. And I think the reason for that is because America is still the most powerful and influential country in the world. So while all these other countries are struggling, everyone kind of flies here to America. Everyone still has confidence. They still have faith in the American economy. So, we have a strong dollar and all of these things that kind of help America. It gives us an advantage over other countries. So we could have the exact same problems. We could be in the same situation as these other countries. Like in the United Kingdom, they're having, all these geopolitical problems. They're having a Brexit, and people are saying like the Brexit's going to hurt trade and it's going to hurt the economy. Well, it's kind of similar with America. America, just like the United Kingdom, is kind of closing itself off from the world. So it's similar. It's hurting sentiment, which hurts the economy. So it's a similar issue. But you look at the United Kingdom's economy, well, Britain's economy, their economy is contracting while our economy is still growing at about 2%. And I think that is because, we have a strong dollar, and everyone's starting to move their money into America because they perceive they perceive America as being safe compared to the rest of the world. But it's really just, it's fake. There's we're all in the same ship. It's just people believe that America somehow is on a completely separate path from all these other countries. That all these other countries, they're going to collapse, but America is going to be stable. But that's not the reality. But what's actually strange is that the one thing that's keeping us alive, the strong dollar, is being attacked as what's holding our economy back. We have the president, we have many high-ranking people saying that we need to start weakening our currency, and these ideas, as they take hold, will facilitate the complete collapse. Because when people realize that even a country like America is not stable, then the people are seriously going to panic even more than they're panicking right now. So it doesn't make sense for us to attack the strong dollar because we think that it's going to help our economy. It's just going to it's going to take away the one stabilizing thing that's holding us up, that's helping Americans, that's providing the standard of living that America has, and that's allowing us to have the influence we have all across the world. As the United States dollar, as it's used less, as people trust it less, America will fall with the dollar. So I think it's gonna fall. I think it's gonna fall regardless if we purposely try to weaken our own currency. But if we try to, that's just going to make it happen a lot quicker and probably a lot worse when it does come down. So that's the first thing I see. It's just that I really I hear this all the time. People saying that the problems, they're all in these other countries, but they're not in America. The America, we're still strong. But in fact, if you look at the Russell 2000, the S&P 500 is still pretty close to all-time highs. It's been performing pretty well, even though it's come down a little bit this past week. But the Russell 2000 is 2,000 small cap stocks, and pretty much these companies, they are they're not as much affected by what goes on in other countries. They mainly rely on selling to Americans. But the Russell 2000 has performed a lot worse than the S&P 500. And the S&P 500 is the index that's mostly exposed to all of these overseas risks. So in fact, it's actually worse here. If you judge it from the stock market, it's worse here than it is overseas. But of course, people are not really going to say that. People do not want to focus on the Russell 2000. People do not want to focus on all those small things. People usually, if you watch CNBC, majority of the talk is on those there's like a small group of companies that have allowed the stock market to perform so well, and that has created an illusion of a strong economy. Even though the stock market doesn't really reflect the economy, it does in some sense. But the stock market we have now, I would say the Russell 2000, which is the small cap companies, is a lot better reflection of our economy than the S&P 500, which is pretty much carried by a small group of companies, which make up majority of the index. And when those companies perform well, the entire stock market, it looks a lot better than it looks a lot better than it actually is. And it creates optimism, and it helps overall companies, but it leads to a lot of investments that wouldn't take place if those few strong companies were not creating the illusion that everything is great. If you understand that. I'm not sure if you... Well, pretty much what I'm saying is, if those few strong companies were not creating the illusion, because the way these stock indexes are designed, if they were not creating that illusion, then people would not have as much faith in the overall stock market. They'll pull their money out of the stock market, and the stock market, and a lot of these companies would have much smaller valuations than they currently have. So anyway, that's the first thing. I just want to say, I just think it's pretty stupid for us to take away the one thing that is actually keeping our economy above everyone else's, and is the fact that we do have a strong currency, and people want to hold our currency, and that helps pretty much all Americans. It helps. It raises our standard of living. It allows us to get access to a cheap capital, so companies can expand cheaply. It helps the government, and it only hurts a small majority of people win. So what happens is, when you try to, like, a few people are actually getting hurt from a strong currency. So if you try to weaken the currency, you'll be helping out a few companies at the expense of everyone else. You'll be hurting everyone else's wealth to help a few companies. But overall, I think once you see the American dollar start to tumble, the confidence in the overall system will be completely lost. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, is what would happen when this currency collapse starts to take place. So what I see happening is I kind of see that, of course there's going to be a flight to safety, and people are saying a flight to safety is already happening. People are buying government bonds. People are holding cash. People are moving out of the stock market. They're moving out of these risky assets. But what I'm saying is I think the real flight of safety would be from like cash and paper into things that are real. So that could be land, it could be gold, it could be sticks, it could be water, it could be food, anything like that. Those resources are going to be perceived as extremely important when people realize that the value of their wealth is purposely being like it's going down to a level where their standard of living is going to be dramatically changed. So it's going to be the simple things. Well, yeah, the simple things like the value of the pretty much the stuff that people don't really think about. Those things will be worth the most when this collapse happens. Okay, so in the traditional downturn, people sell stocks and they buy treasuries or they buy bonds. But if you look at it from that's not going to be where the crisis is. I think it's going to take it's going to take it to the next level. Okay, because all of that's still within the same area. Okay, the bonds and stocks, it's all just paper. All right, but the next major movement would be out of that area and into the real world. And when people enter the real world, that's when chaos starts, because the real world is chaotic. The fake world that's put in front of us is supposed to look stable. Okay, so the first thing I see is a real flight to safety into real things, and we're already seeing that. Okay, in the first quarter of this year, the central banks have been increasing the amount of precious metals that they're purchasing, because precious metals are considered a store of value. Even when things are bad, precious metals will always maintain their value, regardless of what happens to anything else. So we have, the central banks who pretty much know and understand. They manipulate the entire system. These people are preparing. These people are already doing what I'm saying is going to happen. They're accumulating everything because they're aware that it's not going to last much longer. But what's going to be really bad is when things do really get bad, and then all these resources that people are going to be going after, well, there's not going to be a lot of them available, because the central banks and the banks and the governments are going to be in control of these things, because they're already purchasing it ahead of what's going to happen. Like you see China, they're importing a lot of food. They're buying a lot of gold and all that type of stuff. And it's obvious. It's obvious because the central banks, they'll tell you, or any of these, they'll tell you one thing. They'll tell you that everything's fine, everything's great, but then on the other hand, they'll prepare for a collapse. Because if they come out and tell everyone else to prepare for a collapse, then it's going to be complete chaos. But they understand that there is going to be complete chaos, but they want to still have some power and still have some control. So I think what could happen is, when the collapse does happen, the people who has most of these real resources or stores of value are going to be the ones who come out on top. They're going to be the ones who call the shots, pretty much. So all these central banks who are accumulating all this gold, when things do get bad and we lose all of our wealth, who's going to have wealth? It's going to be them. So we're going to be pretty much worthless. We're going to have nothing. Majority of us will have nothing to our name, and that'll basically leave us powerless. So when everything is just scattered on the floor, we would have nothing to basically rebuild an improved system. So that's one thing. Another thing I could see happening is this war. This war with this trade war, currency war, will lead to a real war. But not only will there be a real war between countries, there'll be wars within countries. Because when people who live in America, who have, people who live in America who have enjoyed a pretty high standard of living, see that dramatically change, see the value of their money pretty much vanish, they're going to start fighting back. Because, who's responsible for the value of the currency? Pretty much, they're going to realize that everything that they've been told is a lie. And who's been the one who's telling these lies? And they're going to start to point fingers at people. And people are going to be mad because people aren't used to having what they're going to have. Because what they're going to have is a lot less than what they did have prior. So when people start to lose a lot, that's not going to happen without conflict. So not only are we going to have these trade wars and currency wars lead to real wars, like historically they have. Wars generally have to do with money. All right, that's the reality. So there are wars between countries because of money, and then wars within countries fighting against their own country because of money. So the entire world is going to become one big battlefield. So anyway, those are pretty much the things I see happening when the American dollar starts to be attacked and starts to be purposely devalued, and people lose faith and then they run out of it, but then they realize that there's nothing to run to, so they're left with nothing. Then people are mad. Then as these countries start to fight each other, the people who are mad within the country will start fighting their own country, and then that's how things can kind of escalate kind of fast. So I kind of hope you know what I mean when I say that, but yeah, it can escalate pretty fast. And to basically close off everything, what I want to say is that our Generation Z, will pretty much spend majority of our lives trying to fight these wars and solve these problems, and not all of these wars will be like a traditional war. A lot of these will be wars of ideas, it'll basically be a war of ideas. People with all these different ideas will be coming after each other and trying to figure out solutions, because all of these problems, all these imbalances, all these things that exist that aren't sustainable have been created over hundreds of years. So they're going to take hundreds of years to solve. But what's going to happen is those first 100 years, that's going to be the crisis period. And then the 200 years, let's say, and then the 100 years after that will be like the recovery. But we're going to be living during the crisis period. So I don't know, it could happen when we're all graduating from college, or it could happen right now as we enter college. Who knows? as we graduate high school and move into the real world. Because the overall globally things are extremely unstable, and pretty much everything that I've been talking about is kind of coming in play. You're talking about weakening currencies. Countries are cutting off ties with each other. There's a lot of more extremist ideas, like about the ideas overall has gone to more extreme levels, and it's led to instability. There's countless examples all over the world. There's examples in America, Europe, Asia, pretty much everywhere. Everything is starting to fall apart. People are starting to lose it. So, all of these things are really starting to happen. These things that have been kind of hidden are starting to come to the surface. So I think it's a pretty good reason to believe that if things do seriously break down, it will break down pretty soon. Because once things come to the surface, it's kind of hard to hide it again. It's been hidden for a pretty long time. But now all of this, people wonder why does it appear that everyone is hating each other all of a sudden? Well, people are hating each other because these problems are starting to be realized. The lies that have kept people from fighting each other are starting to come out. And now people are unhinged and they're completely out of their minds. So everyone's starting to fight each other, but it hasn't quite completely come down yet. But because of the trends that are going on globally, it's good reason to think that it'll come down pretty soon. And pretty soon is when our generation, the upcoming generation, as we enter the world, we'll have to deal with. We'll have to fight. So that's why, to close off, I think it's very important that we seek alternative education forms. Because if you go to school, you're not being taught how to survive this war. And remember, like I said, this war is not like a traditional war. It's gonna be a war of ideas. And if you just follow our system, it's gonna lead you to nowhere. Because the traditional system, the traditional education system, once you walk out, you're gonna realize that the path that majority of people took is not gonna be there, because it's gonna be torn apart. And then you're gonna be left alone with pretty much no guidance, and you have no idea where to even go, because the thing that you saw carry your parents, carry your grandparents, that platform is now gone, and you're pretty much alone and vulnerable. So a company like the More Knowledge Association, that's kind of our purpose. That's kind of why we're here. We're here to create that platform for people to be exposed to new ideas, for people to create their own ideas and share these ideas. So that way, so when the current platform breaks down, hopefully people will find our platform, and we can kind of stabilize the world as the world enters chaos. And hopefully we'll be able to make people realize before the world enters chaos, so we can have some level of preparation. Because certain people are already preparing. Central banks are already preparing. Okay? Do not listen to when they say, the only headlines you'll ever hear is central banks saying everything's okay. But you'll never hear about how central banks are actually preparing, because things are not okay. Anyway, that's today's episode of the More Knowledge Show. Hopefully you can understand what I was saying. To be honest, I can't really understand what I'm saying. I'm like stuttering a lot. But anyway, it was a solid episode. You'll see an article on Friday. Have a great week. I'm out. Have fun.